Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This will be to run through my top 50 wide receivers in my rankings, break it up into a tier list for you guys. That way you guys can sort of see where I think the drop-offs are at the position. Obviously, I think that tier-based rankings are generally the best way to go about things, and they're a really important thing to understand, especially as you head into draft season, just because it's really critical to understand that there might be a very significant difference between the wide receiver 12 and 13, while there might not actually be a very significant difference between like the wide receiver 7 and 12, for example. So, as like a general rule of thumb, you always want to make sure that you're trying to pick players that are you don't want to be the first player in a snake draft to take a guy in a new tier. That means that you basically got the worst value of anybody that drafts a player in that tier. So it's just a good thing to understand where those drop-offs are, and it'll really help educate you on which positions you should be looking at in each draft spot. So I love doing this, a lot of fun. If you guys have any questions or disagreements, let me know. Obviously, this is not going to be perfectly chalk. There's going to be some stuff that doesn't line up with the consensus ADPs and all that, and that's part of what's fun is, trying to find the different edges there. And but yeah, should be a lot of fun, and let's just get into it. Might be a bit of a long one. We've got 50 players to talk about. Starting things off with tier 1 for me, not a whole lot to talk about here. I think the one surprising thing that might come across to some people is that I have Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb in tier 1, and I think that some people might look at this as a bit of a contradictory take because Justin Jefferson is not in this tier for me. Obviously, I think that Justin Jefferson is probably if not the most talented, one of the top 3 most talented wide receivers in the NFL. So this is not a knock on his talent by any means. It's just that I'm a lot more confident in the offensive situations for both Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb. Again, they're both fantastic. It's just that in general, I find that if I'm taking the second wide receiver off the board, I'm taking CeeDee Lamb over Justin Jefferson. I know that doesn't really line up with the consensus ADP or anything there, but like for Ja'Marr Chase, you've got Joe Burrow. For CeeDee Lamb, you've got Dak Prescott. Again, 2 teams with bad defenses, so that opens up a lot of opportunity for shootouts. With Justin Jefferson, you've effectively got a rookie quarterback and a better defense, so I just think there's more that could go wrong. I think if either one of these 2 guys were to be the wide receiver 1, I think that's a little bit more likely than Justin Jefferson this season. So not a knock on Justin Jefferson, really. He's a great player. It's just I don't really find myself drafting a whole lot of him just because I think that CD and Ja'Marr Chase are both a tier just slightly ahead of him. Moving on to tier 2 here, 4 players I want to highlight. Again, these are all guys that I'd feel really confident in as my wide receiver 1 heading into the season. First off, we've obviously got Justin Jefferson, who I talked about just a little bit earlier. Only real question mark going to be maybe J.J. McCarthy doesn't come out and just light the world on fire, but he also certainly could do that, and there's certainly a little bit of untapped upside if J.J. McCarthy ends up just being a superstar, because, Jefferson hasn't had a superstar quarterback just yet. Like, the best quarterback he's ever had is Kirk Cousins, so if you got him a superstar quarterback, the sky really is the limit there. So there's certainly some unknown, and that does play into some upside along with a little bit of risk. With Neighbors, we know the quarterback play is probably not going to be what we want it to be. It should be an upgrade relative to last season, whether or not you have Russ, Winston, or Jackson Dart. All 3 of those guys are going to offer significantly more upside for this offense than the guys they were rolling out last year. And Malik Neighbors was a wide receiver 1 last season, so I feel really great about him. Amon-Ra, probably a lock just to be a top 5 wide receiver by the end of the year. I don't know if he has wide receiver 1 overall upside, but you don't necessarily need that if you're getting just rock solid wide receiver 1 numbers. Then Puka, another guy in here. Maybe the biggest concern is just going to be injury with him, but I think if he stays healthy, there is a legitimate chance for Puka to go out there and finish as the wide receiver 1 this season. He's got almost as good of a shot as anybody, and health is just the main concern there, but I have no problem drafting him in the first round. Next up, we've got tier 3 here. These guys mostly being drafted either at the end of round 1 or beginning to middle of round 2. For me, all 5 of these guys are really similar, but Brian Thomas would be my favorite of the bunch, and that makes a lot of sense. He's being drafted the highest. He's hit more Nico Collins, but typically right around the same area. Brian Thomas, if you want to nitpick, the only concern here, well, 2 concerns. One would be that Trevor Lawrence was not the quarterback for him when he really broke out last season. It was Mac Jones. I'm not going to sit here and believe that Mac Jones is a better quarterback than Trevor Lawrence or better for this offense, so that one doesn't concern me. Then the only other concern you could have is that they potentially drafted a generational talent in Travis Hunter. I'm not necessarily of the mindset that Travis Hunter is going to come in and be the wide receiver 1 in this offense by any means. I think Brian Thomas really established himself as a superstar. There's room for 2 players to be really involved in the offense anyway, but if you were going to nitpick Brian Thomas, that would be the way to do it. It'd be say, hey, Travis Hunter's going to come in here and dominate target share, and it's going to make Brian Thomas, it's going to make it tougher for him to finish with like that much of a, like I believe he had like a 35% target share down the stretch last season. That likely could come down, so you'd certainly need a little bit more efficiency out of him, but I love Brian Thomas. I'm drafting a lot of him this year. Nico Collins, was fantastic last season, and honestly, it was a bit of a lost year for the Texans. I know it's harsh to say because they even went out there and won a playoff game, but like we saw Stroud take a step back. The whole offense really didn't do exactly what you wanted it to do, and Nico Collins was still a top-tier wide receiver. He's got a legitimate shot to be the wide receiver one as well. Drake London, some unknown there with Michael Penix and how he's going to perform, but we saw him get hyper-targeted. I think he could easily go out there and get 10 targets a game over the course of the year, and I think he's a really great player as well. I don't think he's quite as good as the guys in Tier 1 and 2. I think that Brian Thomas is a better receiver than him, but not by a whole lot. I think Drake London's a fantastic receiver in an offense that should be sneaky good this year, and it just kind of depends a little bit on what you think about Michael Penix. Ladd McConkey, honestly, the one of these guys that concerns me the most this year is going to be Ladd McConkey. The problem was just that you needed the Chargers to really increase their passing frequency over the back half of last season for him to break out the way he did. You also didn't have a whole lot of target competition at the position. Not that really changed, but they did draft Trey Harris. That is a legitimate number 2 wide receiver in my mind. And they also added Tyler Conklin. Again, not a big threat there at all, but a better pass-catching tight end than they've had. And they also got 2 better pass-catching running backs than what they had by bringing in Najee Harris and Amarian Hampton. So you might not see the same target share that you saw for Ladd McConkey last season. Just knock that down a percentage point or 2, and then also knock down the frequency at which this team passes the ball. I think they clearly have made it apparent to us that they want to run the ball a ton. They tried to do it last year. It didn't really work with the way J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards were running, and then they went out there and signed Najee Harris pretty immediately and then spent a first-round pick on a running back. So I think the Chargers might be a little bit more run-heavy than we want them to be if you want Ladd McConkey to be fantastic. But even with that, I think he's a great player. He belongs in this tier. And then A.J. Brown, again, the main concern is just volume. You're going to get some spike weeks from him because he's a fantastic player. He can go out there and have 3 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown in any given week, but I think if you don't connect on that big play or a touchdown, you're going to be disappointed, similar to sort of what we had over like the back half of last year where the Eagles really went on their run. So I like him, but I think he's more of like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 for me than he's been in the past. Moving on to Tier 4 here, we've got another 5 players to talk about. We'll start things off with Rashee Rice, who, of the 5 guys on this list, might just have the most upside of all of them. He was out there just absolutely dominating the wide receiver position over 3 weeks last season. I know it's a little, presumptuous to assume he could do that over the course of a full season, especially coming off of a season-ending injury, but I think he's going to be the manufactured touch guy in this Chiefs offense. I think he's the best offensive weapon they have, and I think there's a clear path towards him being a top 10, maybe even a top 5 wide receiver this year. There's obviously risk associated with it, but I have no problem drafting Rashee Rice where he's going. JSN belongs in this tier. I'm a little bit concerned about what this offense in Seattle is going to look like just because of, we got a new offensive coordinator. We brought in Sam Darnold. You got Cooper Kupp opposite him. It's going to be tough to see who plays in the slot and who plays outside. A lot of unknowns really in Seattle there, so it makes me a little bit hesitant. I do think that JSN is an incredibly talented player, but the draft capital or the draft cost right now, and then pair that with all the uncertainty, I don't find myself drafting him a whole lot, even though I do think he's a really talented player. We got the 2 oldies, Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill. It's tough to really evaluate these guys. They always fall a little bit in ADP just because we know that at some point soon they're going to fall off a cliff. It might have already started for Tyreek Hill last season. Davante Adams still looked great last year. I'm more confident that he's going to go out there and play well this season, but either one of these guys could finish as top 5 wide receivers. They could also both hit that age cliff and just be completely worthless. So there's a risk associated with both those guys. I don't think either one's going to be worthless, really. I think if one of them were going to be, it would be Tyreek Hill, just because we saw him sort of slow down a little bit last season. But you could associate that with the wrist injury and the Tua injury as well. So I think there's upside for both of them. I'm okay drafting both of them, but they're not necessarily targets for me. Then the one with probably the most uncertainty here is going to be Marvin Harrison. I got to put him in this tier because I'm not fading him at all. I'm drafting him over these guys on occasion, but there's a lot of uncertainty there. You're banking on him really developing more chemistry with Kyler Murray into year 2, just playing better in year 2 as well. Not that he was bad by any means as a rookie. Going out there 900 yards, 8 touchdowns. That's a really solid rookie year. It just didn't by any means meet the expectations we had for him going into the year. So it makes it a little bit tough to really fairly evaluate what Marvin Harrison did last year. Look at perception reception. He was an above average player on every route type. Take the thing that was maybe a little bit the most disappointing for me, which is he didn't really do great on the contested catches. That's supposed to be a specialty for him, but it just didn't seem like he was very strong at the catch point. That being said, we've seen a lot of stuff over the offseason about how he's put on weight, been in the weight room. That should help with that. I am a believer that Marvin Harrison is going to step up here in year 2, so I think he belongs in this tier, but if you wanted to put him a tier lower, I think it's okay to do that. It's just I like him enough that I'm going to put him here. Next up, we've got our first really big tier here. There are going to be 10 players in tier 5 for me, and I think this is really signaling to me where there's a significant tier break between tier 4 and 5 because you're looking at guys in tier 5 that are often going in rounds like as late as like round 6 for some of these guys, along with some guys that are going at the beginning of round 3. So, if you're a guy being drafted at the top of this list, I think you're not really someone that I'm targeting because I think you can get the same caliber of player a few rounds later. Start things off with Garrett Wilson. I think he's a fantastic player. I'd love to see that he got an extension today, actually. 4 years, $130 million. Great for him. But the problem with this is he is once again going to be a member of a low passing volume, bad quarterback play offense. Like Justin Fields showed a little bit of promise last year, but he's by no means going to come in here and be a gunslinger and be a guy that's going to really give you a whole lot of upside at the position. So, the best arguments for Garrett Wilson are that he's going to have an incredible target share, and that's going to result in enough targets that he can sort of PPR his way to being a top tier player. But over the course of his entire career, he's had that incredible target share, and he's also had bad quarterback play, and in many cases, he's had low pass volume offenses. We haven't seen Garrett Wilson really go out there and put together a full season like we're wanting him to, and we keep sort of drafting him like he's going to do that. So until I see it, I just can't do it. I think he's going to be he's a solid mid to low end wide receiver 2 for me, but he's not a guy that I want to draft as my wide receiver 1. You often have to do that, or at least it's a high end wide receiver 2 where he's being drafted right now. T. Higgins, again, just has been a wide receiver 2 his entire career. He's never finished above wide receiver 17 over the course of a full season. I know that he was super hot last year on a per game basis. He was fantastic, but we know there's also a ton of injury risk associated with T. Higgins. There's also, as much as we don't want to talk about it, there's a lot of injury risk associated with Joe Burrow. He's effectively missed 2 seasons in his 5-year career already. So there are question marks surrounding T. Higgins, and I think the best case is he plays the full season and he's a boomer bust high-end wide receiver 2 over the course of the year. Add in some injury risk, add in some potential regression from last season. Maybe the defense gets a little bit better. I think he's like a mid to low end wide receiver 2 this year. Terry McLaurin, really similar. I think he's a fantastic player, but where he's being drafted right now, I just don't quite get. I think he's sort of riding on the coattails of what was a fantastic year last year, but he had 13 receiving touchdowns. That's just far more than what we can expect out of him. I know that Jaden Daniels is obviously a fantastic quarterback, but Terry McLaurin's probably coming back somewhere to the 6 to 7 touchdown range. Probably going to finish with around 1,000 to 1,100 receiving yards. Going to be a solid wide receiver 2 for us, but I don't think he's going to be a top 12 guy. DK Metcalf, really similar to Garrett Wilson, really, going to be a target hog and what should be a mediocre run-heavy offense. Think he belongs in this tier, but he's not a guy that I would expect to go out there and be a top 12 guy. Jalen Waddle, George Pickens, and Jameis Williams, I think they're all really similar players as well, but they're also really similar to T. Higgins. They're basically the wide receiver 2s in good offenses with some question marks, but we know they're going to have a lot of spike weeks. I think that's why they belong in this tier. Mike Evans, I think he's, again, an aging player. There's some concern there, but he's probably going to be a low-end wide receiver 1 to mid-tier wide receiver 2 if he can stay healthy. Getting a little bit older, so you add in a little bit of risk. I think he belongs where he's being drafted right now. DJ Moore, being drafted a little bit too high for me just because I like Rome a lot. I think it's fair to say that Rome has a shot to at least finish as the wide receiver 1 on that team, but I like DJ Moore. I think he belongs in this list. And then Chris Olave, just too talented for me to knock him down a tier here. I think if you wanted to put him 1 tier lower than this, you could, but I just love the talent there. There's a lot of risk associated with it. I know with the concussions, I know with the quarterback play, so there's certainly reasons to be skeptical, but if he plays the full 17, he's going to be a top 20 guy, and I think that puts him fairly on this list. And there's also just a lot of upside if the quarterback plays better than we expect. We could certainly see him go out there and be a top 10 guy. That's in his range of outcomes, and you can't say that for the players being drafted around him to some extent. We've got another massive tier here in tier 6. We'll start things off with Chris Godwin. I just had to be 1 tier below Mike Evans for me just because of the injury concern, but I do think that he's got as much upside as anybody. We saw him be the wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game last season. Obviously, injury-shortened season, got a little bit lucky in the touchdown department, but he's a really talented player. We've seen him come back from injury before. I think he's got a great shot to be a solid wide receiver 2 for your roster after he comes back. And the only reason he's not higher on my list here is just because we don't know quite enough about his injury yet. But if he comes back and he's ready week 1, I'd feel really good about Godwin being a solid wide receiver 2 all year. Tedoroa McMillan, I love him this season. I think he certainly belongs on this list. I think he's going to immediately be the wide receiver 1 in Carolina. I think Carolina should be an improved offense as well. And I kind of think you can go into the season with McMillan as your wide receiver 2 and feel okay about that. And the thing is, you don't have to draft him in the spot there. So I like that for sure. Devonta Smith, obviously lower for me than he is for most people. I think the thing with Devonta Smith is I totally agree that he's an incredibly talented player, but he's also just very clearly the wide receiver 2 on an incredibly run-heavy offense. They also do heavily utilize Dallas Goedert. Not enough that he's like a reliable weekly option, but enough that you're really just fighting. Like, the Eagles want to throw the ball 20 times a game. They want 8 or 9 of those targets to go to A.J. Brown, and then you've got, we'll just say 12 to 15 targets to go between Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, and whoever other scrubs get thrown in there. And that's why Devonta Smith finds himself being just incredibly inconsistent over the course of his entire career. If you ever had a circumstance where A.J. Brown missed time, or even when Dallas Goedert misses time, we see Devonta Smith be great. But to me, that makes Devonta Smith like a boom-bust flex play with upside if there's an injury. And it's kind of like the handcuff wide receiver situation there. I just think he's a little bit too overhyped in fantasy for my liking. He's just not a guy that I think is going to return value unless you get lucky with injuries. Ricky Pearsall belongs in this list for me. Maybe a little bit high, but I think there's just a ton of upside there. I think he showed last year that he can be a really good player. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the whole wide receiver room there. You've got Brandon Ayuk likely unready to start the year. Demarcus Robinson probably suspended for a DUI. Jawan Jennings requested a trade or a new contract today. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in there, and I think Pearsall might just slide into the wide receiver 1 role and do a really great job this season. Rome Odunze, I mentioned, I think he's got a shot to potentially usurp DJ Moore this season. Drafted to be great. Being drafted 8th overall in the NFL draft means that the league thinks you're fantastic. I know it didn't necessarily materialize last season, but it's tough to do that in Chicago with how they played last year. So I think there's a path there for Rome to be fantastic. Sort of more of an upside shot, but he could easily be a top 12 guy if things break right. Calvin Ridley just feels like a reliable low-end wide receiver 2, right along with like Zay Flowers and Jacoby Myers. Just reliable guys. They're not going to be the reason you win your league, but I think you're probably going to get value out of them. I think they'll probably outperform their ADP. They'll probably make the values list when I go out and make that video later on here. Jaden Reed, another upside play. You're hoping he becomes a full-time player. It's probably not going to happen, so he's probably just going to be like a wide receiver 2 over the course of the year. That sort of comes on like a bumpy ride where he's going to put up 6 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns one week and then play 12 snaps the next week, and you're going to pull your hair out. Better best ball player than a reliable weekly starter in redraft, but I think he belongs in this tier if you can just get lucky, if you can play the matchups right. There's also at least upside because I think he's a really good player if he could just become a full-time player for them. Jordan Addison continues to score a lot of touchdowns, just a really good player, belongs in this tier for sure. Jerry Jeudy belongs in this tier as well, talented player. The quarterback play is going to be bad, but the target share was fantastic last season. It's possible that Jeudy leveled up at the end of last year, and if that's the case, Judy's going to be a steal in drafts. And then maybe the lowest relative to ADP for me here, Xavier Worthy. He's just being drafted way too high for me. I like him as like a low-end wide receiver 2 or flex play. Not as a guy that I want to be starting every single week. So he belongs in this tier, but I think he's a little bit overdrafted right now. And the last tier we're going to touch on here is another 11 players. Pretty big tier here. A bit of a different set between all of them, but we'll start things off with Darnell Mooney, a guy that I think is going to be clearly the number 2 target in this Atlanta offense. I think he's a really good player, and I think there's certainly a lot of upside for him just to be like a reliable wide receiver 3 for us, a guy that you can certainly start if you need to. And we saw him be really good last season as well. I think people sort of just forget how valuable he was. Josh Downs, I think he's incredibly talented. I think he's got a shot to lead the Colts in targets this year, and I think for that reason he needs to be drafted. He's a great value for me, and he's someone that I do think could surprise. I think there's going to be some surprising fantasy value out of Indianapolis, whether or not it's Warren or Josh Downs. I think one of those two is going to emerge and have a really good year. Could be both of them if the quarterback play surprises, but I think regardless, I like drafting both of those guys. Jaden Higgins belongs in this tier just as a pure upside shot. Like, Higgins is a guy that could easily be a top 20 wide receiver if things break right in Houston. He's going to be starting opposite Nico Collins. If he's actually as good as he was drafted to be, he's going to have a really solid year. Khalil Shakir belongs in this list, just like a reliable wide receiver 3 for us. He's not going to be the reason you guys win your leagues, but he's not going to be the reason you lose it either. He's going to go out there and start for you whenever you need him, be a reliable asset. He's just going to do exactly for you really what he does for the Bills. He's just good for them. He's not a difference maker necessarily, but he's definitely a nice guy to have on your roster. Stephon Diggs could easily be the wide receiver 1 for an improved offense in New England. I think he belongs here. If he'd be a little bit higher if I knew he was fully healthy, but there's just a lot of question marks coming off the ACL. Aging player as well. He could also just be completely cooked. So a lot of question marks there, but I think he belongs right here. Keon Coleman, right along with guys like Trey Harris, Travis Hunter, and even Jaden Higgins. Like, pure upside shot there. Like, he didn't really show a whole lot last season, but we did see some efficiency. We saw some big plays out of him, and if he could just sort of carve out a more consistent role, we could see a really great year from him. Trey Harris, again, if he can emerge as that clear wide receiver 2 in Los Angeles, he could be great. I think he belongs in this tier. Travis Hunter, maybe belongs a tier higher, but I'm just a little bit concerned about all the, I know that he's a great wide receiver. We're probably going to see him start as wide receiver, but just the possibility over the course of a long season. Like, what happens if they have a cornerback go down to injury, right? Like, that doesn't mean he's hurt, but it means that now maybe he's playing cornerback the next week because they need somebody to fill in. And if that happens, he's basically dead to your fantasy roster that week. So there's a lot of injury risk just because if any secondary pieces get hurt for the Jaguars, that could negatively impact his snap share. And I think that's just the reason I'm a little bit hesitant to draft him where he's being drafted. Juwan Jennings belongs here. We saw him be a really talented player for the Niners last year. I know I mentioned he asked for a new contract or a trade earlier today. If he got traded, I'd be pretty out on him. But if he's still there, I think he's a guy you could start as a flex this year. Matthew Golden, another pure upside play. Like, if he ends up emerging as the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, he could be really good. So he belongs in this tier for sure. And then Deebo Samuel, probably going to get some nice manufactured touches in Washington. I don't think he's as good as he used to be. He didn't look like himself last year. Aging player, has taken a lot of hits. I don't necessarily expect him to bounce back, but I think he's still a guy you could play in like your flex if you needed to. So that'll do it for the wide receiver tier list. Up next, I'm going to be doing the same video format, but at the quarterback position, and then we'll close it out with the tight end position. We're also going to be making sure that we give you guys a mock snake draft and a mock auction draft by the end of the week. So 3 more videos coming out this week. Make sure you guys don't miss those, guys. I guess that's 4 videos this week. So a lot more content coming up. There's going to be at least 3 videos every single week the entire rest of the off season. There'll be even more than that during the course of the regular season. So make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss any of that future content. I'm going to be here all off season and all season long to help us win some championships together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So stick around. If you stuck around this far in the video, please do give it a thumbs up. It helps me out quite a bit. And if you have any comments, disagreements, players I somehow missed or something like that, players I didn't talk about at all, let me know in the comments below. Love interacting with you guys there. It's a whole lot of fun. So appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.